portions of KDKR's daily programming do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, what is the future of test scores? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, is standardized testing for college admissions going away? Today, Prudent Money contributor and college admissions expert John Hupalo is here to weigh in. John, always good to talk to you, especially in the new year.
Bob, Happy New Year to you. It's great to be with you.
It's kind of hard to believe it's already, we've cycled in another year, and here we are, 2023. Some crazy things in the news today. I thought we'd hit some of these before we talked about standardized testing. And this story seems like it was 5 or 6 years ago. I know it wasn't, but remember the Rick Singer, and he was the head of the college admissions cheating scheme, was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. So what are your thoughts on the way this turned out? Has this had a positive impact on the admissions process? And kind of what are your thoughts as we put closer to this story?
Yeah, Bob, you and I had the exact same initial reaction. I said, well, how long has this been going on? Because all we have to say it's before the pandemic. So it could have been in 2010 or it could have been in 2019. But it was March of 2019 when this story broke. And for your listeners who said, I'm going to start 2023 with a New Year's resolution to start listening to Bob Brooks a little bit more. And this is their first time on the show. I'll just give a little recap. So this guy, Rick Singer, dreamt up this scam to basically find what he called a side door, not a back door, but a side door to get kids into college. And so basically the scam was that he had two services, if you want to think of it that way. One was to help your kid either knowingly or most likely unknowingly cheat on their ACT and SAT scores. So you had a couple of people helping them either change answers for kids or do something to affect their test scores. And then the second part, which was really kind of the home run, was that he was able to bribe a whole bunch of coaches and athletic administrators to basically put non-athletes on the recruited athlete list. And, coaches regularly get kids into school, and most schools say, we'll let them in as long as they meet our academic standards. So he helped the kids fix their test scores so they met the academic standard. And then he got them in through the side door for the return payment from a parent into a charitable trust. So, the great thing here is the parent said, okay, I want to help my kid get into the school, so we're going to make believe that they're a rowing athlete. I'm going to go and take a picture of them near some water, and Rick's going to convince his coach to let the kid in through the side door. Just absolutely terrible. 50 parents were caught up in this scam, including a couple of very famous actresses, a whole bunch of really rich hedge fund guys, 11 coaches to 8 colleges. And these weren't like, John's School of something. This was big-time cheating at Georgetown, Stanford, University of Texas, Austin, Yale, all kinds of stuff. So about 50 people were sentenced. They range in their sentences from basically probation or some small sentence like 14 days in jail, all the way to the mastermind, Rick Singer, who, like you said, very recently was put in, and he's going to be in the slammer for 3.5 years. So what do I think? I think the admissions offices have learned nothing about this. It's going to be one of these things that there was this rogue guy doing bad things, and they found all the rotten apples, and they're in jail. Maybe some schools will change some of their, processes. For instance, these kids that were let in as athletes never showed up on a varsity team. So you think maybe somebody in the admissions office would call over to the tennis guy and say, hey, coach, by the way, how's little Johnny doing? And that never happened. So that's what happened there. It's a very sad saga of a bunch of rich people scamming the system in a big way.
So it begs a couple of questions. The first one is It always amazes me. I don't know if you watch the show American Greed, but you see these guys and they pull out these scams, and it's just amazing to me that they have, I don't know if it's arrogance or what it is, but the arrogance or confidence that they can just get away with this. That's what always amazes me.
Absolutely phenomenal. You're right. It amazes me too that they don't think the gig is going to be up. But of course, I live in New York City, just probably 70 short miles from someone who was elected to the United States Congress and lied about basically everything about his academic, his work background, where his mother was from, complete bold-faced lies, and he was elected to the Congress. So. It's the chutzpah, I think, as my friends in the Jewish religion would say, is sometimes overwhelming.
Yes, it is. Well, so I was expecting you to say, because we hadn't talked about this in a long time, I was expecting you to say, yeah, this has had a positive effect on the college admissions process, and they've changed this and they've changed that, but you say, not anything, really. So it begs the question, what are the chances of something like this happening again and getting away with it for a while?
Yeah, I think honestly that if there are changes, they're way behind the scenes. And like I said, maybe they have checks and balances now where some of the schools will go back and say, oh, we're going to make sure that the enrolled athletes are actually athletes and they're enrolled. So there may be some of that. But you know what happens, Bob? Humans are absolutely phenomenally gifted to look at systems and find a way to cheat them. And so they could plug a hole, and somebody 5 or 10 years from now will find, maybe a trap door. They have the back door taken care of with the donors, the side door with Rick Singer's little scam. There'll be another door. But unfortunately, I think if there's a system, folks will figure out how to cheat it until they get caught, and then we'll say, how did that ever happen? And life goes on. I wish I could be more optimistic to say, oh, yeah, there was this great, robust response and, all this is happening. But I haven't seen any response much other than this rogue went out there and scammed our coaches, and it's really terrible.
I don't know. It's kind of signs of the time, I guess. But speaking of which, and it wouldn't be a show if I didn't ask this question, what is the latest and greatest information in regards to student loan forgiveness? As I was thinking about this, as this story has been continuing on and on and on, in fact, it just won't go away. It just kind of sits in the background. It makes me think that this is just not going to happen.
Yeah, well, Bob, I'm a Christian and I pray that you and I one day will not have to talk about this.
Right.
And I also realized when you said at the top of the show the sort of time frame. So Rick Singer's Operation Varsity Blues scam was pre-pandemic. This was actually marked the moment of the pandemic, almost to the day, right? So this whole idea that borrowers should be paused on not having to make student loan payments started in March 2020, just exactly at the time of the start of the pandemic. And so there's this two things have happened on simultaneous tracks. The administration said, because of COVID, it's a national emergency, we can't have borrowers under our federal student loan program make payments anymore. So we're going to put the interest rate to zero, and we're going to not require them to pay. And as you said, these were in 3 and 6 month increments. So every 3 or 6 months, you and I would say, gee, I wonder how much longer they're going to kick the can down the road. While all that was going on, and by the way, the can is still on the road and still being kicked,
right.
The Biden administration last August said, hey, you know what? We've got to find a way to give permanent relief to these borrowers. So back in 2016 and 2020, the far left side of the Democrat Party said, we've got to forgive all the student loans in the country. This is a big travesty that these borrowers are being made to pay on their obligations. And so, it's politics. So they finally got to a place in August last year where the Biden administration declared victory, and they said, guess what? We are going to forgive up to $10,000 of all student loans as long as the borrower makes less than $125,000. And by the way, if that same person was eligible for our Pell Grants, which are given to the neediest kids, we're going to give them an extra $10,000 of forgiveness. And so we have a program to forgive up to $20,000. And we know what happens, Bob. When something like that comes out, the lawyers start rattling the can saying there's got to be a way that I can make some money on this. And sure enough, there were 6 or 8 lawsuits alleging all kinds of things about it, how it wasn't fair, and there were very technical parts of why the program is set up incorrectly and that the president doesn't actually have the authority to do this. And so, long story short, the cases, 2 of them, came before the Supreme Court. And on February 28th, there are going to be oral arguments around those 2 cases. And once the justices decide if this student loan forgiveness program is permissible, there will be an answer. And they've also said, by the way, we know that the can's been in the road a long time and it's been kicked a bunch of times, so we're going to have an expedited review of this and we're going to have an expedited opinion. So the sort of short story, I think, on all that is this case is widely watched. Right now, the student loan pause is on until the end of June. But like all things with this program, it's crazy complicated. The pause is also tied to the Supreme Court case. So they're saying 60 days after the Supreme Court case is let out, then students are either going to have to start repaying those loans or not. So we're going to definitely talk about this until the summer, maybe monthly, you decide. But this is not going to be off our topic list anytime soon. And where it stands exactly is we've made no progress on the student loan pause since 2020. No payments are due. No interest is accruing. And the Supreme Court's going to tell us whether or not the Biden's administration's proposal to forgive up to $20,000 of debt is legal or not. And that will come sometime in March or April or perhaps May, depending on what expedited means to the Supreme Court. I don't know what that definition is.
Well, you just officially made my head hurt. John's website is mycollegecorner.com. Great resource if you've got a child in high school and you're getting ready to go through that process, mycollegecorner.com. I get this came across this interesting email from a college counselor to the students, and I wanted to read it to you and get your reaction. It says, although standardized test scores are currently not required by many universities for application purposes, a growing number of universities are requiring a score to register for classes. This is in addition to the requirement of test scores for many scholarship opportunities. Therefore, I continue to recommend every student take the ACT and or the SAT at least once to have a score to submit if necessary. I will continue to keep you updated as I recognize the trends in the future. Have you heard anything about this type of thing happening?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had not heard about a score required after the student's already on campus or trying to enroll. Right? I hadn't heard that. And that sounds. I'm not sure how you can do that, but let's start at like the last point that whoever wrote this, gentleman or lady, made, which I think is really important. I think the best practice advice is for students to take those exams. And I say that kind of with a heavy heart because my own daughter, who is dyslexic, had one devil of a time with those tests. And I was not a good test taker, and I don't like them, and I wish they weren't around. But the reality is they are around. And the reason why, Bob, everyone seems to think, unless there are very special circumstances, it's better to just take the test. And the reason for that is that about 1,800 schools right now are either what they say test-free, meaning they don't really care about the test, or test-optional. And a lot of those test-optional schools, a good number of them anyway, started this test-optional policy, meaning take them if you want, but we don't require them. They started them during the pandemic because there were all kinds, you might remember this, there were all kinds of issues with actually just getting the test administered and where kids could go to take it. It was just terrible for about a year's worth of time, just horrible. So they said, all right, we're going to sort of let this go. But as the gentleman or lady said correctly in that email, it didn't mean that they didn't use those test scores when they were handing out merit aid, or that they were taking those test scores and using them for some purpose other than whether or not this is an indication of the students, how they're going to be competitive against the rest of the class. So there are lots of different uses for those SAT and ACT scores, And everyone I talk to continues to say, we're telling our families, take that test, take it once or twice. One of the nuances here that a lot of folks don't know a lot about is that many times if you take the test 2 or even 3 times, the schools will do what's known as super score it. So that means, if they get a higher score in one section in a later test date, they'll always use the highest score that came out of how many ever tests you took for that particular area of the test. So if I happen to be bad at math, which I was for a long time, and I got a low score the first time I took it, but I got a really good English score, if somehow I lucked out the second time and got a higher score, then all of a sudden I have my good English score and a better math score. So the schools are using that super scoring as a way to try to give students a possible advantage there. So the best advice still is to take those tests, to try to do as well as you can. Kind of interesting anecdote on this, though. I'm a Boston University graduate, and I look at the BU website. Not too long ago, I looked and saw that they became a test-optional school during the pandemic, and they reported that their applicant pool expanded greatly. They had a 19% increase in first-generation students applying, 24% increase in black students, and almost a 29% increase in Hispanic Latinx students. So they actually saw an advantage of being test optional because it diversified their applicant pool. So I think a lot of this is playing out. It's really interesting. But again, I think the best advice for students is take that exam. It might actually help you in ways that you're not aware.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a little tough to convince a senior who just started his senior year that he's gone and looked at one college, loves the college, wants to go to the college, has to have a 3.8 to get in without a test score, and he's like, I got all that. Why should I go take the test score? It's a real interesting not argument, but debate that you could have with your child. So what are you seeing in regards to admissions with standardized testing not being a requirement? I mean, is this COVID, of course, has changed a lot of things and set a lot of trends in motion. Is this something that you look at and you go, wow, within 3 to 5 years that the whole standardized test system is going to be gone? Or maybe this will settle out to kind of 50-50.
Yeah, I think the latter. A year ago, I was actually on the bandwagon that this might actually be the end of these tests because, they did away with the subject tests, right? At one point, there are biology tests and all these other tests, and they realized, well, those aren't actually very useful. So they did away with that, and there was a big argument being made a year ago, which I still think is pretty valid, is that an ACT or an SAT exam is not a great predictor of how well a student's going to do in college, right? And so the colleges have been really tested to try to find out what else they could do, what could they ask, how can they evaluate a student without a test score, like an ACT and SAT. And in Boston University, I looked at that because I'm an alumnus there, so I tracked them a little bit. They've been writing a lot on their website saying, we've learned a lot in the last 2 or 3 years about who's successful in our school, the characteristics, the traits of students coming here. So now we look more at a student's character, their academic accomplishments while they were in high school, what did they do, and then their personal profile, what achievements do they have? Are they leaders? And are they given on their website? They talked about, for instance, if your kid plays the violin or something, or maybe this is on a website of someone who's looking at Boston University. The example was, if your student's a violin player, maybe one way you show like this personal character is the kid goes out and gives lessons for younger kids who want to play the violin, or they get their quartet together and they play it someplace at a nursing home, or something that shows that the student has a sort of drive and energy and the ability to make a difference in the world, big picture. But for the college on campus, we want kids here who are going to be engaged and fun to be around and all kinds of stuff. So how are we able to do that? And when they got away from this BU anyway, when they got to the test optional, they actually found that their applicant pool was doing better And I think the schools are all learning a little bit more. And at the end of the day, that'll be good because, look, you and I, we both have children who are in college or going to college, and we know that having them in a place where they feel comfortable, meaning challenged academically, engaged either athletically or doing something around the campus, and just having a good fit is really what's most important. And so, maybe that test score is not all that important to helping a kid find a place that fits. And on the other side of that, the school's acknowledging that, hey, you know what, we want these kids like this. Maybe they don't have the greatest ACT score in the world, but they're going to be great students and they're going to contribute to our campus life. That's what we're looking for.
It's really interesting as you talk about that because it makes the process very subjective. What looks good to one person who's looking at these applicants may not look the same to another person who's looking at these applicants, whereas at least the standardized testing brought in a benchmark.
Yeah, that's right. And I think great observation. And the other side of that coin is that they make sure in the admissions committee they have 4 or 5 readers of any particular application. So they're trying to get a consensus. And the other side of that you're saying is that there are some schools where, you go on the campus tour and they tell you the nonsense that we just want well-rounded kids and we don't really care all that much about your test score. And that's just not truthful. Some schools just have a knockout, right? If you're at a school and you've got a 24 on your ACT and their average score is 34, you've been knocked out, right? You're not going to get into that school, and that's a benchmark. So I think you're right in identifying that it cuts both ways. The benchmark can help some people, might hurt some people, but at the end of the day, maybe something really good that did come out of the pandemic around college application is that the schools are really making a big effort to say, how am I going to figure out what this student's really about? Their high school performance is really important. What they're doing on their personal life is really important, meaning what are they involved with in their community or in the school? And then, generally what's their character? So I'm a little bit more optimistic these days that the schools have made bigger progress in this area than they have in some other areas.
We got less than a minute left. I'm just curious as to how this has affected the college testing industry. I mean, this is a big industry.
Big industry, a lot of money, and so they're adapting. They're talking about making changes in their testing protocols all the time. They're going to have an online test now. You're not going to have to go down to the gymnasium at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday to take the exam anymore. So the technology is going to help them. They went through a really rough patch, no question. Schools were out, and then, of course, there was a bunch of cheating going on electronically. So they solved a lot of those problems. And so that industry, like all good industries that has a lot of money associated, is going to change, and it is changing, and hopefully for the better.
Well, John, always great to have you on the program. Once again, mycollegecorner.com, and we'll talk next month.
Look forward to it, Bob. Be well. Thank you.
All right. God bless, John. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I was just thinking about how so many things have changed over the past 3 to 4 years. COVID came in, and it just seemed like all these different aspects of life as we know it have changed, this being one of them. And I'll tell you one thing. I know that my youngest, who is a senior in high school, just loves the fact he didn't have to do that much for the testing to get into college. So we'll see what happens. This is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.